is Transitional Words in Sequence, lesson number 2. Sentence starters and sequences, part 1 of 3. Again, this is Transitional Words in Sequence, lesson number 2. Sentence starters and sequences, part 1 of 3. All the PowerPoint presentations can be found at magichatwritinginstruction.com. PowerPoint presentations are available at magichatwritinginstruction.com. Transitional Words in Sequence, lesson number 2, sentence starters and sequences, part 1 of 3. Objective, use the handout. Transitional Words in Sequence, sentence starters number 1, to write a paragraph. You will need some handouts today. You'll need the handouts, Transitional Words in Sequence, sentence starters number 1, and you'll need Transitional Words in Sequence, the experience-based model paragraph. Both handouts are available at magichatwritinginstruction.com. Please go to magichatwritinginstruction.com and print out your handouts. Before proceeding with this presentation, please make sure that you have got this handout on your desk. This is the Transitional Words in Sequence, sentence starters number 1. The handout can be downloaded from the website, magichatwritinginstruction.com. Again, go to magichatwritinginstruction.com. Please get this handout. You're going to need this handout to complete this presentation. Some of you out there might find this particular part of the presentation to be too basic, and I just want to emphasize right now that this is really the beginning of something much larger. In the next video presentation, Transitional Words in Sequence number 3, we really start to get a lot more elaborate with the kinds of things that we're going to do. So stick with it. Resist resistance, go with the flow, internalize these prompts, and you'll see all the various things that we can really do, the powerful things that this system will allow you to do. So we're going to start off with the very basic writing prompt, do you like school? And I'm going to ask that you make a list of 3 or 4 things that you like, or 3 or 4 things you do not like about school. Just choose one side and make a list of 3 or 4 things you either like about school or 3 or 4 things you do not like about school. Now refer to your list and pick a reason why you do not like school. This is my list. School is boring. School is too early in the morning. School is a waste of time. Never learn anything useful in school. I've got trouble staying awake in school. And school is never fun. So when picking a reason from this list, I'm going to pick school is never fun because I think that that reason is the broadest, the most general. What I mean by that is it includes the other reasons. School is never fun because school is boring, it's way too early in the morning, I never learn anything useful, basically can't stay awake. All of these things can come under school is never fun. So on your list, look for that one reason that seems to include the other reasons, that one big idea that includes the other reasons. And let's select that reason when we go on to our next slide here. So now we're going to get started actually using transitional words in sequence. Go to your handout, sentence starters number 1. Look at sentence number 1, the generalizing category. Select one of these 6 word phrases. So you've got as a rule, for the most part, ordinarily, as usual, generally, usually. Select one of those word phrases. Select a phrase that you think makes sense with the idea that you've already selected from your list. So for some of you, as a rule might work. As a rule, school is never any fun. That might work. For others, you might want to select a different word phrase. Select the word phrase that you think makes the most sense with your selected reason, and write your first sentence. So here's my first sentence. I selected the word phrase for the most part, and I went again with my selected idea or from my list, which was school is never any fun. So together it reads, for the most part, school is never any fun. You also now should have your selected transitional word phrase for sentence number 1 and the idea that you chose from the list on the 4 or 5 things you don't like about school. You put them together and you've got sentence number 1 of your response. So guys, we've got to go back to the handout. We're going to go back to sentence number 2, illustration category. We're going to choose from one of the 9 word phrases that we have in our illustration category. For one thing, for example, namely, in particular, such as, thus, for instance, to illustrate, specifically. Choose one of those word phrases that seems to make the most sense to you, that you like, that you want to use for our next second sentence. So I selected, for example, from the illustration category, and I selected the idea, all my classes are very boring. I wanted to go with an idea that I thought supported my main idea, school is never any fun. So therefore, I went with all my classes are very boring. I felt like that was a good support for why school is never any fun. So I want you to do the same. Select an idea from your list, your 4 or 5 things you like or don't like about school. Select an idea that supports the idea in your first sentence. Use the word phrase from your illustration category. In my case, I went with for example, and write your second sentence. Now back to the handout for sentence number 3, the restatement sentence. The purpose of the restatement sentence is to expand and elaborate on our idea from sentence number 2. So we select one of the 8 phrases, and we're going to expand, elaborate, and maybe go more specifically into our idea from sentence number 2. So I chose my restatement phrase, in other words, and I expanded on the sentence number 2, my classes are very boring. So what does it look like? My classes are very boring. What does that really look like? Well, in other words, I always fall asleep and then I'm never engaged. So I'm really trying to show the reader exactly what boring looks like, to make it more vivid, to make it come to life, to explain it in a little bit more detail. You also should do the same thing. Take the idea from sentence number 2 and try to make it more vivid, in more detail, more specific in sentence number 3. Now we're going to go to our 4th sentence category, addition, and we're going to select one of these 6 addition phrases. Now the purpose of this category is to bring in new information, again information that will support our sentence number 1 topic sentence. So you can see from my 4th sentence, my addition sentence, I went with furthermore. I never feel like I learn anything that I will use in my life. So I want to expand on why school is never any fun, and expand on the idea that it's boring, and really explain to the reader why I think it's boring, why I'm falling asleep, why I'm having trouble staying motivated. Well, why? Furthermore, I never feel like I learn anything that I will use in my life. So it's new information, but it's also information that helps explain and round out my previous sentences. Finally, we're going to choose from the summarizing category to conclude our paragraph with the sentence that really sticks out and resonates in the mind of the reader. And finally, as you can see, I selected to conclude for my sentence number 5 category. I think school is a waste of time. Now, with this sentence, with the 5th and final sentence of the paragraph, you're going to be tempted to simply repeat sentence number 1. I want to emphasize that you should not repeat sentence number 1. The purpose of sentence number 5 is to really drive your point home. This is a good time to try to begin to take what I'm going to call compositional risks. This is where you might want to add some humor. You might want to add a little personal flair. Think of a way to summarize the point that you've been trying to make throughout the previous 4 sentences in a way so that what you're saying will really stick in the mind of the reader. Now, with this one, I think school is a waste of time, exclamation point. Okay? Which is very similar to school is never any fun, but it drives it home a little bit more and emphasizes it. This slide is very important because it's important that you remember that we're still in the building stage. The finished product will be far more sophisticated, and well, beautiful might be a stretch, but the finished product will be far more sophisticated. I definitely want to include this slide because I know from my experience using this method, it does seem at this time, after just introducing the students to the basic paragraph structure, that it's redundant and repetitive. But really it's important to keep in mind that these word phrases are really designed for textual evidence. So I know it's not clear yet, but it will become clear that the example sentence is really for textual evidence. The restatement sentence is really for restating that evidence. The furthermore sentence is really for bringing in new ideas, paraphrasing new ideas that relate to the evidence and the main idea. And then in the concluding sentence, you're really going to try to figure out a way to combine the new ideas with the evidence in such a way so that it gels with your topic sentence. I also want to tell you that you're going to start switching up these words and word phrases and sequences, and you're going to start doing all kinds of things that do require more creativity. But before we can get creative with the sequences and the word phrases, and before we can start adding our own individuality to the writing, we've got to do a few more things. We first have to basically internalize these sequences and these word phrases. So how do we do that? Really, the best way to do it is through repetition. So I'm going to ask that you complete some brief writing prompts using this basic word phrases and categories from your handout. And we're going to call these controversy rights. You've already done number 1, so basically you just have to do number 2 through 5. Let's take a look at our controversy rights. Should a man be able to marry more than one woman? Should a woman be able to marry more than one man? Should the drinking age be the same as the legal age to own a gun? Are tattoos art or self-mutilation? You should respond to each of these questions using your sentence starters handout, using the 5 categories and the word prompts from those categories. After you've responded to all 5 prompts using those words, you'll be more familiar with the phrases, and eventually you'll be able to memorize them and use them fluently. I wanted to point out that you can use the transitional words and sequence categories and word phrases to actually think through your responses before you even put pen to paper. So let's take a look at how this works. We already did the first one, so let's go on to the second one. Should a man be able to marry more than one woman? Well, before I even put pen to paper, I'm going to just think through my response using the word phrases from my categories from my handout. So you got your handout out, you already know your categories. Here are my word phrases. For the most part, well, for the most part, yes, a man should be able to marry more than one woman. For one thing, women are incredibly beautiful, and why should a man only have to have one? In other words, a woman's beauty necessitates that a man be able to marry more than one woman. Furthermore, you know what? Women should be able to marry more than one man, so what's the big idea anyway? I believe in equality. All things considered, beauty is beautiful. Let's marry as many people as we possibly can. Alright. Not a great response, okay? And not a response, by the way, that I agree with. My wife would definitely have something to tell me if she would not like that response. But you get the picture, right? I can use these prompts, these word phrases, to think through the issue and just sort of play around with different ideas. And by the way, these are just some word phrases. Other word phrases will work too, so you don't necessarily have to use these word phrases. In fact, I encourage you to use different word phrases from the categories on your handout. This is a great thing to do before you put pen to paper, to just help you think through the response, so you have an idea of how you want to start it, how you want to end, and the details you want to use in the middle. Everything in transitional words on sequence builds on what came before. So we're starting at the very beginning with our basic sentence starters and sequences, and we're going to get a lot more complicated and elaborate. So you've got to get these sequences memorized. You've got to memorize a few word phrases from each category. It's not that hard. All it's going to take is repetition. So you've got to complete your controversy rights, all of them, before we move on. After you've completed your controversy rights and you've begun to internalize the categories and sequences and word phrases, then you can really go on to start taking risks with your word phrases, using new word phrases and new sequences, which is what we're going to discuss on the next lesson.